All right, we're here today in the KAPcast, and I'm delighted to have with us Kevin Donnelly. Kevin, thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, Rob.
Kevin, I'll do my best to give a bit of a rundown. You're a senior fellow at Australian Catholic University in Melbourne, and you were put in charge in 2012 to review the national curriculum, which is a big point of something we'd want to address today. And you're a regular contributor, Courier Mail, Daily Telegraph, and other. And on TV, and I think more to the point for me that you're interested in some of the radical social changes I think we're experiencing, certainly in my lifetime, and I'd like to enlighten some of our listeners as to what's happening out there and give some of your thoughts and views on some of those things. Have I captured your background there well enough?
Yep. The only thing I would add, I taught secondary school for 18 years. So I taught mainly English and, as you know, written a number of books. But when I was teaching, I got involved in what they call like the culture wars, what John Howard called the battle of ideas. And that's something a lot of parents need to be aware of, that what the cultural left has done, and we'll talk about this, I'm sure,
Yep.
is take over the education system.
Yep. Yeah, it's an interesting. In fact, I was just discussing with you before. The staff here didn't realise that they said, "Do you know Kevin Donnelly?" I said, "Well, I sort of do. I've got a bad habit of trying to read like 4 or 5 books at once. So I've had that on my bedside table for the last few months. I'm halfway through it. I haven't finished it all yet. But that was in the Parliamentary Library, so I picked it up, and it was of interest to me. It's sort of this political correctness and everything is sort of thrown around a lot, in conversations, but I'm not sure if people have tried to delve too deep into, and I guess increasingly we're not lending our thoughts enough to this stuff to be conscious of what's happening, and try and do a little bit of that today with you. I see so you're an author of some of your books, How Political Correctness is Destroying Australia, How Political Correctness is Destroying Education, and Christianity is Good for Us, and also the editor of this book, which has a lot of contributions, Cancel Culture and the Left's Long March. So Kevin, we had... to bring things sort of to a context here, in let's say primarily in Queensland, but we've had a big issue was Peter Ridd and the debate over the reef science, and I understand that takes you out of your specialty in education, but you talk a lot about critical thinking, and I'm still picking myself up off the floor after being educated by people outside I'd say the institutions that are sort of where there's just no objectivity, no tolerance at all for the groupthink, and a bloke called Peter Ridd courageously came out and one of the most highly credentialed reef scientists we have and you could on the reef you could say in the world, because North Queensland and Townsville is the hub for reef science, has come out saying some of this stuff just doesn't add up, and he was removed from the universities, and they've done, and I don't know who even the they is, but they've done everything possible to quieten him and deafen him. And whether I agree with him or not, and I do happen to, significantly agree with him, but there's just it is amazing how much effort has been put into shutting him down, and it cuts to that point of critical thinking that you address in education. Could you tell us a bit about that and how that seeped in?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty old. I did matriculation many years ago when we still had matriculation for Year 12. And in English, we did a lot of what they called clear thinking. So the idea was, if you're looking at an argument or somebody's opinion, you would weigh the evidence. You would look at how it was presented. Was it logical? Did it make sense? Was it rational? Was it just emotional? If it was, try and get behind that and find out what the actual reasoning was. That kind of disappeared from our education system many years ago. So a lot of young people have gone through school and university no longer being taught how to think rationally, how to base it on logic and argument, and it's become more emotional now and more about being politically correct. So what happens is, like Peter Ridd, you might have all the facts, you might know what you're talking about, you can prove it, but people won't listen. And that's why he got kicked out of the university, because people now are very emotional. It's all about being politically correct or being, as they say, woke. You have to really be with the vibe. If you were to say to me, for example, that a man is a man, a woman is a woman, if I was woke, I'd say, well, that's wrong, because you can self-identify, you can be whatever you want. So the problem we now face is that we no longer get involved in arguments and debate where it's about reason, it's more emotion.
Motion. Yep.
If people disagree with you, like they did with Peter Ridd, you get cancelled. The same thing happened to Israel Folau, Margaret Court. What they were saying, you can agree or disagree, but I've always argued people should have the right,
Yep.
freedom of expression. But now, if you say what people don't want to hear, if they disagree, they cancel you, and that's pretty crook. I mean,
And
that's something really we've lost. And as you know, our freedom depends on being open and able to debate.
And I've heard it said before in these type discussions that you say whether you agree with it or not. I totally agree with you there. It's just as important to have. You might consider it abhorrent, the view, but it's important to have that out there so it can be discussed and identified. So if someone's pushing Nazism, it's almost just as important to have them out there so that you can see it for what it is, rather than pretending it doesn't exist. Would you agree with that?
I would. I mean, I was taught that you don't attack the person. You look at the argument.
Yes.
And you weigh the evidence.
Yep.
But what's happening now is people attack one another.
Yep.
So it's more about, I don't agree with you, so I'm, going to have a stoush or I'll cancel you. And the whole point about politics, as you know, and about our Westminster sort of parliamentary form of government that we've inherited mainly from England, is that the whole point is to be rational, to argue, to debate, to listen to the opposition, to consider, different points of view, and to try and get common sense and arrive at what is best for the country. But now it's more about emotion, about argument, people, not listening to one another.
Yep.
And that's why we're in such a terrible state. And we can talk about different issues, whether it's the environment, whether it's transgenderism, whether it's about multiculturalism or even Aborigines. We're not having a clear, open debate about those issues.
Yep. Yeah, it's that, and it you can see how this is merging. I know you talked about the postmodernists. It's always easy when we're having these discussions or people listening to them to try and nut out those definitions, because you're saying who's the they all the time. What's the force behind that? And would you say that it's the postmodernists is sort of a good aggregation of those people that would that shut down that debate, or sort of I'd consider the enemy in this case?
Yeah, I mean, one of the chapters in that book you mentioned by Gary Marks, the first chapter, he kind of traces it back, as I have, and you can go back to as far back actually as, Stalin and Lenin, when you had the communist revolution in Russia during the First World War, that one of the things they did was to either put in prison or actually kill anyone who disagreed. So there was a war in Russia, The communists did kill people, put them in prison. Stalin put thousands of people in the Gulag, in Siberia, who he disagreed with. So it goes back to communism, to socialism.
Yep.
And, whether it's Pol Pot, I go to Cambodia quite a bit. If you look at the killing fields in what Pol Pot did, if you look at what happened in China with Mao and the Cultural Revolution, people, again, were put in jail or some were tortured because they didn't agree with what the party wanted, what the leader wanted. So I trace it back to communism, socialism. And then during the 1960s, there was this cultural revolution, as they call it, and a lot of the intellectuals, the academics, in Europe in particular, talked about postmodernism, about deconstruction, about gender, post-colonial theory. It goes on. But you've got this rainbow alliance of theories like gender, transgender as well. And they don't want to listen to people. They don't want to have a good open debate. What they argue is common sense is no good because Western society is wrong. It's oppressive. That's why they, look at Captain Cook and they want to graffiti his statue. In London, they threw rocks at Winston Churchill's statue.
Yeah.
In some universities, Sydney University, you're not allowed to say the First Fleet was a settlement or a penal colony. In the national curriculum, you have to call it an invasion. So they really have taken over. I trace it back to communism, but it got a kick along during the 60s because of postmodernism, as you say, and now it's taken over our universities and our schools.
How do you think... I don't think there is a good answer to this, but everyone wants to point the finger at something now. Like, where is this coming from? And it's a bit frustrating for me because everyone says it's the Greens, and I think, well, you can get rid of the Greens, but there's still that sort of nebulous type agenda from. It goes a lot deeper than just a political party or in the individuals, doesn't it?
It does, and I mean, I went to university the late 60s, early 70s, and people old enough to remember that was a time of the Vietnam moratoriums.
Right.
Gough Whitlam, Jim Cairns. It was quite a radical time. So we had moratoriums, people took to the streets. It was Woodstock with music. There was Joan Baez, there was Bob Dylan. There were all these groups singing and talking about freedom, liberation, equality. We had Germaine Greer, the female eunuch, the birth control pill. People started to say, change society, get rid of what I'm now called male, pale and stale. It's like they wanted to get rid of the old idea about family, about authority, about government. So a lot of those young people who went to university during the late 60s, early 70s, they all went into the public service. They all went into the ABC. They all went into the Labor Party. So you've had for the last 40, 50 years, lots of people going through the system who became radical during the 60s and 70s. And they took it on board. They wanted to overthrow capitalism. They wanted to get rid of Western culture. Yes. They wanted to get rid of, even things like agriculture. They wanted to change that so you get rid of farming, agriculture. They wanted to throw everything upside down.
Yep.
And certainly, with marriage, as we saw with the Marriage Act,
yep.
Marriage is now between a man and a man. Whereas I grew up, marriage, and the Bible tells me, marriage was always between a man and a woman.
Yep.
So it goes way back then, but these people now, if you like, they took over institutions like education, family, the ABC, and the political parties, even the Liberal Party.
A lot of people say to me often, Rob, you got a job to look after your electorate, and there's a lot of problems in Queensland, youth crime, this and that. But you bring up gender language, but we can't all sit by and watch this stuff happen. And someone's got to put their stake in the ground. And I'm proud to say that we're the only ones in Queensland Parliament. I'd say we've got a perfectly clean bill of health on sort of holding the line on what would be those conservative social sort of values. And I'm not even trying to, say right here that we're right or anything, but it's just trying to provide some counterpoint to this tidal wave of destroy every institution that's in there. But we put a bill in on gender language 2 or 3 years ago about he said, she said bill that was about protecting people's rights to gender language, which was, I felt, discrimination in reverse because I'm forced to accept everyone, all these extreme versions of what constitutes a male, or what all types of cultural things, abortion, euthanasia, and everything else thrown in the mix. I'm told that I have to accept these, and everyone speaks plainly without fear of getting chastised in the parliament. Something as simple as protecting people's right to say he and she, so that they wouldn't be sued in a restaurant for accidentally calling someone the wrong pronoun, which will happen. It's only a matter of time that sort of stuff will occur. And crikey, it was one of the most uncomfortable debates I've had to have in Parliament. And I'm saying, hang on, I'm just asking for the same tolerance you're asking for me. This is not, like, I'm not out to offend anyone, but I should have some rights here as well to maintain my vernacular. And everyone said, oh, you're punching at shadows, but I mean, that's how fast all this stuff is moving. That was only a couple of years ago, but now, you would be seen as, perceptively seen as in the media as the minority for saying, oh, we should maintain gender pronouns. That sort of seems like it's on the way. Just this relativism, everything just moves so fast with this. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, it has moved pretty quickly. And, I mean, there are a couple of issues here with this whole transgender thing. And I'll give you an example. In England, a year or two ago, the Labor Party in England had an affirmative action plan for women. So when they had pre-selections for Parliament, the Labor Party said, you have to have 50% women applying, and we need women into Parliament. And what happened was, about a year ago, those men who self-identified as women, trans women, they got permission to apply under the category of women.
Yeah, right, okay.
So you had a policy that was supposed to help women get into Parliament. These men who self-identified as women, and they're not women, they got included in the quota for women. So about 50 of the Labor Party women, on the different committees, they all resigned and said, I won't use the word, but they said this is rubbish. Because we want tolerance, we want women to do well.
I've got no problem with that.
Now you're letting men take our positions. And, another example, I've got a couple of nieces in Melbourne. They've come back, their kids have come back from school, 10, 8-year-old kids. And the boy has said to the mums, Mum, I was in the playground and I said, come on, boys, let's kick the footy. And I was in the classroom and said, hey, boys, come over here. And the teacher had a go at me, and I was warned not to say boys. And I said to the teacher, but they're my mates, they're the boys. And the teacher said, no, that's gender language. You've got to be non-gendered, non-binary. You have to call them they, if you know what I mean. We've got in the public service, even the federal government now, they've got manuals telling you what to say and what to do. So these issues, and I think many more parents are beginning to realise how dangerous it is, that it's not just now theoretical, it's not just academics, it's actually affecting people every day of the week. And as I mentioned, Israel Folau, Margaret Court, they lost their jobs. I was in Tassie last week at a conference and I met Archbishop Porteous. He was taken before the commission, the Anti-Discrimination Commission, for simply arguing from the Catholic point of view about marriage that it did not involve men and men. It was between men and women. And he lost a lot of money because he had to defend himself in the Anti-Discrimination Commission. So this stuff is pretty real, and it really is impacting on people more and more. My view, we have to know where it came from, and B.A. Santa Maria taught me this, God bless him. You have to know where the enemy comes from, why they argue the way they do. You have to understand them, before you can start getting into the debate about why they're wrong
Yep.
and what needs to be done to make it better.
Yep. I mean, saying on that women, transgender in sport, I mean, it almost seems so ridiculous when you're trying to run the arguments. At KAP, we used our annual yearly motion in the Parliament to discuss that we protect women's sport by only allowing biological women to compete in sport. And I was in this ridiculous position of leading the debate in the Queensland Parliament of trying to argue, like, I even skimmed over some of the arguments because they were so self-evident, it seemed ridiculous even bringing them up. So we were going through the records of men versus women for similar events for 100 metres, and to demonstrate that there'd be a natural advantage for people who are changing over, which, I mean, but I had to drop a lot of that out of my speech because you only had 5 minutes to speak or something, and that was, it just seemed irrelevant even saying that, and which, brings me to the point, some of this is just such nonsense. But I think a lot of Aussies relate to sport and have daughters playing sport, and it's one of those battlefronts. And I hate using the word battlefront because everyone then it invokes those emotions where they say, yeah, it's all hate speech and that sort of nonsense. But and I always notice that I get called that in Parliament, where they say they often use the word hate speech, and I really take offence to that because, I mean, the virtues of Christianity is love and acceptance and tolerance and those sort of things, that's got nothing to do with trying to debate an issue, and you can do it with the greatest respect. There is, I mean, I get afforded none of that in kind back towards me when I try and raise these issues in Parliament. It's just purely run on emotion. Actually, there was another thing I wanted to raise with that. I was talking to a close friend in Brisbane the other week that attended a debate, and with there's expensive private schools in Brisbane, and they said it was just ridiculous. Someone had got up and just mouthed all those platitudes of Black Lives Matter and climate change and and just all those mainstream sort of issues that they could, but there was no substance to the debate. And I mean, the debates, the sport of debate is supposed to be that area where that's pure, where you can debate. And the adjudicators remarked on how brilliant the speaker was, and everyone was fawning over this speaker, and she says just it was crazy. Her point was that it was we've lost that ability to be. We're not teaching our kids to be critical thinkers. We're just training them to mouth these platitudes and say things that they think is popular and run off emotions, and it seems crazy.
I mean, that's very true. And I mentioned I taught, for 18 years. And one of the novels I taught was George Orwell, 1984.
Yep.
And some of your listeners will know the book. But Orwell grew up in England, obviously, and he was writing at a time of communism, of Stalin, but also fascism under Hitler. And Orwell makes the point that dictatorships or totalitarian regimes, one of the quickest way they try and dominate and keep control is by taking control of language. And Orwell writes, if you can control language, you can control how people think. And one of the things that's happened in Western culture, Western societies, is that what I call the cultural left, they've now taken control of the language. And that's why, you have to be careful what you say all the time, because if you say the wrong thing, you're immediately attacked as hate speech, or you're attacked as being Eurocentric or racist or patriarchal or a misogynist. So instead of getting into a debate where you look at the argument, they'll attack the person and use language to put you back in your box.
Yep.
And the real issue here is that it's not only stifling debate where people get cancelled or no platformed. I mean, a good example recently is Germaine Greer in England. She can't talk on campus now at a university. J.K. Rowling, some people were burning her books because she argued against transgenderism. There was an American journalist, Barry Weiss, last year who wrote for the New York Times.
Oh, Barry, yeah.
She had to leave a job because she was attacked for wrongthink, for not conforming, because she wanted to argue the case, give a balanced view. She said Black Lives Matter. Not all people are white supremacist, and Black Lives Matter, but white lives matter too. And maybe all the police, there was a couple of schools in Sydney, and Mark Latham brought this up when I was speaking to him. There was a couple of schools in Sydney where the kids were doing banners, Black Lives Matter, basically not kill the pigs, but, the police were called pigs. And these kids were being taught this stuff. And my argument is you go to school to be educated, not indoctrinated, and teachers shouldn't try and use that to push their agenda. What teachers should be doing is giving kids the ability to think and to weigh evidence and to be balanced and to listen and not get involved in that kind of sort of acrimonious debate where they're not listening and they just say, oh, shut up, I disagree, I don't want to hear you. Even in Parliament, as you said, you can say something that's common sense, but because you're against, you're politically incorrect, they'll attack you straight away.
Yes. And, it's funny when you talk about J.K. Rowling, and obviously not put in the same class, but I don't think they've attacked C.S. Lewis yet, have they? But if we refer back to some of the values he espoused, it'd certainly be in conflict with what we're seeing today.
They haven't, but I think he's on the list.
Yeah.
I've been following the debate the last couple of years in England, and authors like Jane Austen or even William Blake, who's a poet I love. In America, Harper Lee, To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yep.
That was cancelled. Even some people argued Moby Dick had to go because they killed whales. I mean, it goes on and on. Jane Austen, as I mentioned. One of the other things, in kindergarten now and primary school, we had a couple of kids, James and Amelia. We read to them as they grew up, and we read things like Thomas the Tank Engine. You can't read that now because the academics, they argue Thomas the Tank Engine because you got the fat controller, the mainline trains, the goods trains. It's kind of teaching about hierarchy, and it's teaching kids that you have the boss and that they're the worker.
Oh, right.
And that, you know what I mean?
So
they argue.
Yeah.
So the other one was, obviously Little Black Sambo because it was racist.
Yeah.
And Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty. You can't have Sleeping Beauty because at the end, when he kisses Sleeping Beauty, he didn't ask, can I kiss you? Because she was asleep.
Yep.
So they're now teaching this in primary school about consent and about respectful relationships and about the whole gender-safe schools. And I get angry. One school in Melbourne, they made little 10-year-old boys stand up at assembly and apologise for being boys.
Yeah, there's something like that happened in Brisbane too.
It's out of control.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, if you've got people listening who are parents with kids at school, they've got to be aware of how dangerous it is and how, parents, I always argue, morally, are their kids' first teachers.
Yeah.
And parents have to take responsibility and find out what's going on.
Well, it's funny because there's more and more talk these days here of people homeschooling. Because I think whether we agree on sort of social issues or land in the same place, I think a lot of people just becoming more and more cynical. Actually, in fact, that whole there was a lot of tumultuous sort of attitudes against the vaccine mandates, and again, not to touch on the merits of either side of the argument, I just find, I think there's that burning sentiment inside people that things just don't seem right and they're not ground truthing, which makes them question everything. And I think subversively, a lot of this what I think is just absolute garbage. It keeps getting indoctrinated kids, and we find yourself trying to ground truth these things you're told through the your education system, whatever, and it just doesn't ring true. That it creates that real uneasiness, a real deep down uneasiness with people that's difficult to define, and I think that sort of manifests itself in funny ways, like in those riots and protests along the mandates.
It does, and I've spoken to a number of evangelical schools in North Queensland over the last few years, and their enrolments are going up. And, over COVID, the last couple of years, homeschooling's going up as well. And I'm sort of organising a conference later this year where there are a number of people in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide, all wanting to start their own schools because they're not happy with the government schools and the non-government schools because kids are being indoctrinated and they're not teaching what we were taught about history, about literature, about, good hard maths and science. Kids aren't getting a good education. So a lot of parents now are trying to get together and to start their own schools. And I think that's a good thing because unfortunately, when I co-chaired the review of the national curriculum, when I looked at that and all the state and territory stuff, and Queensland was one of the worst, they're dumbing it down and you don't have the standards. And that's why in all the international testing, mathematics and science and reading, Australian kids are going backwards. And we're not in the top 10 anymore. We're going backwards all the time because it's being dumbed down. And that's another issue. It's not just about the culture wars. It's also about kids not being taught a good, strong academic curriculum.
Yes.